and then just say, yeah, good evening, everyone. So from the kind of Zoom housekeeping point of view, hand over to Peter and Will to do the introductions and the presentations in a second. You're on mute at the moment, but we will go to a Q&A session towards part 2 of today. So we will invite you to unmute and join in that part of it. In the meantime, get some interaction going there in chat. So open your chat box, find your little chat icon there. Tell us where you're joining from if you haven't done already, and start to think of some really tough questions for Will, because there is time for Q&A. He might head some of those off, but let's start lining up some discussion, and maybe tell us, where are you on this veganism topic? So have you already gone vegan? How are you finding it? Are you on that journey? Do you disagree with that completely? Tell us where you're at in terms of veganism, and we can use that to promote some discussion. I think that's all from the Zoom point of view, but over to you, Peter, to kind of introduce Ryedale Environment Group.
Absolutely. Before I pass over to Will, this event, it's been brought to you by the Ryedale Environmental Group, and I'd just like to very briefly just give you some information about who we are and what we do. This is a very brief presentation, I promise. So what do we do? We're a very young group. We don't do much ourselves. However, what we do is to facilitate communication between other groups. If there's a small group without a constitution or a bank account, we'll do grants on their behalf, for instance. Moving on, if possible. Oh, here we are. Yep. And we very much help local environmental groups to get together. We have meetings every month where we all share ideas. For some of you, these name places won't mean much to you. But if I say that Kirby Moorside is a reasonable sized town, which has got, it's had an environmental group going for something like 10 years, compare that to Kirby Misperton, where we have 3 activists. So it's a very mixed church, but there is a lot going on. And these are examples of the kind of projects that we do. If you look at the one on top right, the local council collects some rubbish, obviously, but there's an awful lot they don't collect. Things like crisp packets, cat pouches, this sort of thing. And I think there's something like 10 different categories of things that people can now leave at our recycling centre. It's anything that, it could be a mainstream thing like crisp packets, or would you believe we collect mascara wands, which are given to the local hedgehog rescue. So it's a whole, whole range of different things that we do. Food share projects is another thing. Other initiatives that we promote. Hopefully, many of you will have heard of food share programs. It's not a food bank. What happens is that a lot of food gets wasted and thrown away because it's approaching its sell-by date. This food is then given to food shares, who literally give the food away. And if you take the Pickering food share, for instance, they've been going for a few months and they've saved literally tons of food from being chucked into landfill. So that's the sort of thing we do. We like to promote groups and local initiatives such as this via our website, via our Facebook page. This week, we've got a whole load of events. And after Will's spoken, I would ask you to go on our website, go on our Facebook page, and see if there are any other events or presentations that take your fancy. So this gives you a bit more detail. On a kind of personal note, I've known Viva for many years. Back in Worcester, where I come from, I was part of an animal rights group. In fact, my background is much more animal rights than environmentalism, so I feel quite at home with groups such as Viva. And in fact, one of our crowning glories is when we got Juliek Gelatley to come and give a talk at the Mayor's Banquet in Worcester. So yeah, I'm very grateful for Will agreeing to talk tonight. So over to you.
Lovely, thank you, Peter, and thank you to Peter and Paul for putting so much work into this event, and for all of you for giving some of your Sunday evening to discussing veganism. So just a little bit about me before we kick off. My name's Will. I've been vegan for just over 9 years now. I went vegan back in 2011 before it was cool, or before it had become sort of mainstream. And most of the questions that I had back then in 2011, 2012, really up until 2015, 16, largely were just people saying, what is a vegan? Or, you know, I haven't heard this word before. Whereas now I'm finding a lot more of the conversation that I do as a campaigner, or just in my general day-to-day life when I'm talking with friends and family, is asking a little bit more information about, well, I'm interested in veganism, but I'm worried about this, or I'm interested in veganism, but I heard this, you know. So a lot more interest in veganism and in environmental rights, in animal rights, more interested in health, which is brilliant to see. But as a campaigner, I tend to have thousands of conversations each year, slightly limited this year with COVID, but thousands of conversations with people who want to learn a little bit more about veganism before they sort of get stuck in. So this is for anyone who just is, you know, quite interested in veganism themselves, anyone who started to reduce their consumption of animal products, anyone who's already vegan, for how to best answer questions from friends and family and colleagues. So I'm going to tackle the questions that I've found are the most frequently asked in my experience, and then I want to leave sort of half of the time we have over to you guys, so that you can put in some questions, and I will do my best to answer them as best as I can. So I find that these questions tend to fall into one of three categories: health, what about B12, what about iron, for example, animals, you know, can animal farming be ethical, or it can't be that bad in Britain, and then planet, you know, isn't veganism more harmful in some ways, and so on. I find that the first one that often comes up actually is about the health, because, you know, you might think veganism is better for the environment, it is better for animals. However, if you're concerned that it's going to turn you into a walking skeleton, or it's going to really damage your iron consumption or anything like that, it would be very hard to actually move in that direction before the health concerns are alleviated. So and for me personally, it was actually the health side that first got me into veganism. When I was 15, my dad read the China Study, which is a really very interesting read on the health effects of a largely vegan diet. And we both made the decision, along with my mum, to go vegan there and then. I felt the health benefits quite quickly. I felt a lot lighter, a lot more energy, a lot less bloated, especially from cutting out dairy. So yeah, for me, health has always been quite an interesting one. So many of you are probably aware of this. I'm just going to sort of roll through some of the most common questions and just give an answer. There is more information on this site, which vivahealth.org.uk, for a little bit more information, but I'll just be going through an oversight. So by far and away, the most common health question that I've been asked is, where do you get your protein from? With a lot of people have said, I've learned that meat equals protein. Meat is where I get my protein. Where on earth would I get protein from if I stopped eating meat, if I stopped eating animal products? So while it is true that meat does contain protein, when you actually look at most whole foods, plant-based sources, they contain a good amount of protein themselves. So of course, some of the more obvious ones would be nuts and seeds as really, really good sources of protein, along with lots of other minerals in them. But even if, as long as you're getting enough calories in to sustain your needs, so let's say you're a typical 30-year-old male, you would probably need about 2,500 calories. As long as you're getting in those 2,500 calories and you're eating a varied whole foods diet, you absolutely will be getting enough protein. There is a term for protein deficiency, which I used to know, but it's so rare, and it happens to, I think it happens to 3 people on average in the UK every year, in a country of about 70 million people. It's absolutely one of the rarest problems you can have, which is called protein deficiency, where there's a fancy scientific word for it. But, you know, if anyone knows it, that'd be great. But the point is almost that so few people are aware of, you know, what protein deficiency actually means. It's just not a thing that we have in this country. As long as you're getting enough calories in, you will be getting enough protein. And that's true whether you are a couch potato or you're a bodybuilder. There's lots of vegan strong men and strong women, lots of vegan athletes. Patrick Baboumian, it holds multiple records for some of the heaviest weights ever lifted, and he's been vegan for the vast, I think, for the last 10 or 15 years of his life. Definitely, if you look up a picture of Germany's strongest man vegan, you'll see, you know, there's no protein deficiency going on there. And beans, pulses, and whole grains are all really good sources of protein. So as long as you're having a varied whole foods diet, largely whole foods diet, there's plenty of protein in there. A follow-up question I often get is, where do you get your iron from? So there's green leafy vegetables are one of the best sources of iron, and especially as long as you ensure that a lot of your meals contain both vitamin C and iron, they link together nicely to mean that the iron is absorbed much more readily by your body. So mixing green leafy vegetables, you know, kale with watercress and maybe some tomatoes mixed in, or some peppers, which are really high in vitamin C, that's a great way of incorporating your iron in. Again, there's a link during the presentation which would take you to Viva's health website, and you can download a really handy graph which has about 20 different food sources which are really good sources of iron. Off the top of my head, tofu is an absolute brilliant one for iron. Dried fruits are really good as well. So dried raisins, dried apricots, figs, really good sources. And again, there is anemia. Anemia is quite far more common, certainly in this country, than protein deficiency. But when you actually look at whether vegans are being affected any more so than non-vegans, it is a problem. Anemia is a problem in both demographics. So ensuring that you're having lots of beans, lots of pulses, lots of whole grains, that really is the answer to a lot of these questions. Whole grains, whole foods are really good sources of iron, of protein, of calcium. The question, what about B12? So B12 is an extremely important vitamin for us. Whatever your diet is, it's extremely important to ensure we get enough B12. And the way that humans used to get B12, it's found in soil, it's found in healthy soil. So if we throw ourselves back to thousands of years ago, when we didn't buy extremely washed, clean, sparkling carrots from the supermarket, for example, or, you know, everything was before the times where everything was completely sanitized. You know, if we see soil on carrots in the supermarket, we complain, with good reason, because soil is terrible for our teeth. But when we think thousands of years ago, the way that humans were eating, they would be consuming a little bit of soil with the foods that they were eating. And also when they were eating animal sources, those animals were consuming their food from the soil. They would be consuming a bit of soil. B12 would be going into them. We would be eating their bodies. We would be getting B12. Nowadays, with factory farming and with far more sanitized foods, whether we're talking about carrots or potatoes, or the way that pigs, chickens, and so on are reared, very rarely are these animals actually getting B12 in a natural way themselves. So we have a situation now in the UK with animal agriculture where the animals are being given a B12 supplement because they're just eaten in barren concrete sheds. So they're not actually getting B12 in a natural way. They're consuming B12 through supplements, and then we're consuming their bodies for the B12. So a lot of the time I have people say, well, I just don't want to take a tablet. I don't want to take a supplement. That's not natural. So I'd rather get my B12 from animal sources. But of course, if we're just turning to animals who are having B12 supplements themselves, it's just one extra link in the chain. And there are no health side effects of taking a B12 tablet. You can also get B12 through fortified products. So plant milks are really good sources of B12, say soya milk, fortified oat milk, and so on. I personally would recommend taking the Vegan Society multivitamin tablet. It's got all the B12 you need. It's also got all the vitamin D that you need. And the NHS recommends whatever diet you follow, whatever lifestyle you follow, please take a vitamin D supplement in the months between September and March, because in this part of the world, as we can see from general weather in this country, we just don't get enough sun during the winter months to consume enough vitamin D. So it's a really handy way of taking a vitamin D, a vitamin B12 supplement, which also is sort of just a backup for all of the other vitamins and minerals, just in case you're not getting them from whole food sources. At the end of the day, though, whole food sources are, absolutely essential for general good health. I've also been asked whether we need animal products to be healthy. I've had a lot of people say it's natural and it's normal for us to eat animal products, so we should continue to eat animal products, whatever the ethical side, whatever the environmental side. If we have evolved eating animal products, we should be having animal products. Actually, yesterday I was doing some outreach, and I had this exact conversation with somebody on the high street. So if we think back to 10,000 pre-agriculture, so pre 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years, 200,000 years ago, there's certainly no denying that humans have had animals as part of their diet for millennia. There's certainly no denying that. What is different between the modern day human and the prehistoric human is the quantity of animal products that we're eating. So for one thing, more than 8,000 years ago, there was no human on this planet consuming dairy. It's only in the last 8,000 years that we've introduced dairy into our diets. When you think about humans, the modern human, about 200,000 years we've been going. 8,000 years is an absolute sort of drop in the ocean for that. It's a very recent introduction that we've had, and it's the explanation for why so many people in this world are lactose intolerant. Around 70% of the world's global population is lactose intolerant, with the reason being that we just have not been having dairy as part of our lifestyle, as part of our diet for the vast majority of our existence. So in terms of whether it's natural or necessary to eat dairy, it's absolutely not something that has been integral to our diet. In terms of whether it's natural to eat meat, we can eat meat. There's certainly no denying that. Whether humans 200,000 years ago were having meat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or having a large quantity during their dinners almost every evening, that is certainly far, far less likely. And scientists are quite in agreement here that we were more gatherer hunters rather than hunter gatherers, if we're going to see it in terms of which one took precedence. We were opportunistic hunters, certainly. And we would eat meat when it came about. If humans did manage to kill a mammoth, that would certainly provide a lot of meat for quite a while. But in terms of when you look at our physical anatomy, everything about us suggests that we have evolved or been designed, however you like to put it, to have a largely plant-based diet. Our intestines are extremely long, just like lots of other herbivorous. Well, every herbivorous natural vegan in the animal kingdom has very long intestines, whereas the natural omnivores and natural meat eaters have very short intestines. The reason being, it's much better to get the meat through your body quickly before it starts to release toxins if you're a natural meat eater like a lion. Our teeth when we chew, we have far more similarity with how a cow or a sheep chews their cud than how a wolf or a dog snaps up and down, or a crocodile. Our motion is far more side to side, grating, with our big molars, which are really brilliant for breaking down grains and sort of tough products like that. Natural meat-eating animals tend to have a much more snapping up and down motion. So next time for any of you who have a dog or a cat, next time they're having dinner, if you watch their motion and compare it to the way that we eat, it's a much more different sort of way of chewing. But of course, people can say, well, maybe we're not naturally designed to eat meat, but we can eat meat, therefore I will. And it's certainly true that we can eat meat, and I have come across some vegans who like to make out that meat eaters are all an unhealthy in terrible health, and that is simply not the case. There's certainly lots of healthy meat-eating athletes who are healthier, fitter than lots of vegans. However, the case is that we don't need to eat meat in order to be healthy. There's no blood group which necessitates eating meat. There's no person or demographic where meat is an absolute necessity. So I'll be happy to answer more health questions near the end of the talk. These are just the ones in my experience that I've found are often quite common. So in a nutshell, following a whole foods diet, following a sort of rainbow diet of lots of different colors, lots of different colored foods, is a really good way of ensuring that we're getting enough vitamins and enough minerals in. This is quite a handy sort of eat well plate. So as you can see, fruits and vegetables take up a huge chunk of what we should be eating. We'll all be familiar with the 5 a day. Realistically, 5 a day is great, but there's certainly nothing wrong with incorporating even more vegetables and fruits into our diet. And a lot of people in modern day Britain struggle to even reach 5 a day. The more we reach, the more vitamins and minerals we're getting from those extremely healthy plant sources. As you can see, whole grains are really great as well. Pulses, nuts and seeds are huge. Kidney beans, black beans, aduki beans, baked beans, walnuts, pecans, sesame seeds, so on. Small amounts of oils and fats. Vegans, certainly we can indulge in some treats as well, especially with all the vegan cakes and things that we've got going now. And then enriched foods. If anyone's a fan of Marmite, it's a brilliant source of B vitamins, especially B12, really good. So this is the sort of food chart that I would encourage people, if they're looking to move more in the vegan direction, these are the sorts of foods that we're encouraged to eat. And these are the foods that definitely bring about lots of health benefits. And just finishing on the health side with an NHS quote, with good planning and an understanding of what makes up a healthy, balanced vegan diet, i.e. whole foods diet, you could get all the nutrients your body needs. And the NHS on their website show that anyone in any stage of their life, whether they're a baby, whether they're a teenager, whether they're an adult, whether they're in older age, a vegan diet is absolutely fine, absolutely satisfactory for all your needs. And if anyone has any more questions either that don't manage to get covered at the end of the talk, or you just want to delve into a bit more information, vivahealth.org.uk, it's completely peer-reviewed, completely referenced sources. All of what I've just said has not been sort of plucked out of a vegan agenda. It's all just based on studies, all just based on the science. And vivahealth.org.uk goes through lots of studies and sort of breaks down in a lot more detail what the deal is with iron, what the deal is with calcium, in a way that is not really possible in the next 20 minutes or so. So I'd really recommend that website as a source to go to for some more details. And now we'll move on to the animal side. So it is under a lot of people, when they hear vegan, it is very easy to just think it's about the animals, and that is often the sort of area that comes up when I'm talking to people about it. And so I'll just cover a few of the most common questions that I've been asked. Again, I'll cover, if you have any other animal related questions, I'll be happy to cover them at the end of the talk. So one of the most common questions I definitely get is, what about organic farming? What about free range farming? What about local farming? Surely those things are okay. I certainly there seems to be a sort of wide agreement that factory farming is not okay, or at the very least it is low welfare. Factory farming constitutes the vast majority of the animal products that we eat in this country. So often I do have people say, well, I only eat organic or I only eat free range. But of course, when you go to restaurants, unless you're going to a specific organic restaurant or specific free range restaurant, you'll most likely be consuming food that comes from factory farms. So yeah, it depends on the species. For example, chickens, it's about 98% of chicken flesh comes from factory farming. It's a similar level for pigs, similar level for well, eggs. More and more free range are going on. But then, so yeah, a lot of people say, well, if I only stick to an organic free range diet, which is local to me, surely that doesn't mean I'm causing any harm to these animals. So I'm just going to cover a few of the routine standard procedures that happen on organic dairy farms, organic egg farms. I won't be going into too much detail, but just as a sort of warning, these aren't pleasant things that happen on these farms. So one of the ones that certainly I find, and when I talk to people about it, find very disturbing, even if we're talking about organic free range eggs, excluding eggs from your neighbour's back garden. I'm talking about if you go to a shop and you buy organic eggs, which are in a packet, the way, so when a chick is born, they are checked to see whether they're male or female. If they're female, they'll be going into the farming, so that they'll be producing eggs, and those will be being sold to the consumer. If they're male, the egg laying breed does not put on enough flesh to be profitable to be sold for as broiler chickens. They don't put on enough weight to be slaughtered and sold for meat. So the egg industry, whether it's organic, free range or factory farmed, sees male chicks as completely worthless to their production. They can't be used for selling flesh, and they can't be used for producing eggs, obviously being male. So the standard way of dealing with these male chicks is to put them in a gas chamber or macerate them when they're just 1 day old. And that is quite in this country, over 40 million male eggs are dealt with in this way every year, just from the egg side of things. In organic dairy farming, it's a similar story in that male dairy calves don't produce milk, being male, and they don't put on enough flesh to be profitable as beef cattle. So again, they are, well, thousands of them are exported to the continent, live exports to be sold as to be killed as veal, where it's a lot more popular on the mainland Europe. But about 95,000 male calves are just shot when they're 1 day old in the UK, because they don't produce milk, they don't put on enough flesh. They're seen as a worthless commodity in the dairy industry. So those are two of the things which are standard in organic farming. There are a few dairy farms now which are not doing this, and they're keeping the calf with the mother for a little bit longer. They're still separated at a very young age, far younger than would be natural for a cow and her offspring. And nevertheless, the vast majority, the norm remains that organic dairy cows, male calves are killed when they're just 1 or 2 days old. In organic and free range farming, mutilations are still quite common. So sheep farming is often seen as at least the one species which has remained very much free range. However, lots of sheep breeds, their tails are cut off when they're just a few days old, because they can get dirty, and they're simply being bred in lowlands where it's far muddier. The conditions are a lot less hygienic, and so the farmer's solution is to cut off the tails without any painkillers when they're just a few days old. And at the same time, the male lambs would be castrated so that they're easier to handle when they grow older. Again, that is done without painkillers, without going into too much detail, I've just written up a report on sheep farming in the UK, and certainly the way that castration is done, as the word suggests, is a very horrific, painful procedure. Even when lambs are given painkillers, which is quite rare because it's not a legal requirement, they still suffer chronic pain for the rest of their lives, often because it is simply a mutilation of their body. So those are some of the things that are standard in organic and free range farming, as well as factory farming. Whether it's local or not, a lot of people do like the word local. It does sound a lot better to think, if this farm is local, then it should not be guilty of any of these transgressions, any of this cruelty. For the animal, it makes absolutely no difference whether they are castrated 10 miles out of your town or 100 miles. Local doesn't actually, it's a great word, and certainly, I'd rather buy local apples than apples from 1,000 miles away. But in terms of animal welfare, local or not is kind of a moot point. It doesn't mean that local areas are banned from doing mutilations or banned from killing animals when they're just 1 day old. So another question I have is that if we stopped eating animals, then we'd get overrun by them. At the moment, we have about, as I speak, we have about 70 billion land animals kept in farms, largely factory farms around the world. We kill 1 billion land animals every year in the UK alone. So it is, it's an understandable thought, if we just stopped killing them, surely this 70 billion land animals would, run loose and cause chaos. But the only reason why we have all of these land animals, farmed animals, whether they're cows or sheep or chickens, is because we are the ones who are artificially inseminating them ourselves. We're the ones who are breeding them. To take an example, the modern farmed turkey cannot actually naturally reproduce anymore, because we have selectively bred over and over to the point where the turkeys put on too much weight too quickly to actually even be able to mate naturally. They're only being bred. We're only having millions and millions of these turkeys every year because humans are artificially breeding them, raising their young, killing them, raising more young, and so on and so on. So if we did stop eating animals, there would be no risk of being overrun by animals. We would simply stop breeding them into existence, into these factory farms and farms all over the world, and it would actually free up a huge amount of land for us, and for wildlife to rewild areas which have been overtaken by animal farming. Another question I get is that other animals eat animals, so why should we have to follow some sort of different rule? Lions eat animals, wolves eat animals. Why is it that I have to follow some sort of different moral compass? And the reason for it is that there's certainly no denying that humans do have certain distinctions from other animals. We do have a moral compass that we follow. I would say certainly studies have shown in different societies of animals, they also do follow certain rules, certain hierarchy, certain principles, and so on. But in no other way do we base our actions on what other animals do. So some of us may have seen the rather cute videos of penguins stealing stones from other penguins' nests. That is not something where I would then, burgle a house and say, well, penguins steal, so I should be entitled to steal as well. In no way would we base that morality on the human world. And there's lots of other things that we don't follow lions in the way that we treat everyone. We don't follow penguins in the way that, there's in no other way is a duck our guiding light on how to live. But we can recognize ourselves that if we don't have to eat animals, then there's no need to eat animals. And in the same way, we don't, lions don't artificially breed chickens and keep them in cages and breed them over and over and eat them like that. there is certainly a big difference between hunting animals out in the wild and keeping them in farms where they cannot express their natural behaviors. That is by far and away the way that animals are bred and eaten in this country. So comparing it to, you know, the rest of the animal kingdom doesn't really add much, because there's no other animal who treats farmed animals in the way that we do. Another question: the UK's got very high welfare standards, so surely just UK produce is fine. All of the mutilations and killing dairy cows when they're just one day old, and male chicks and so on, that's all standard practice in the UK. It's standard practice in the EU, standard practice in the US. Viva has investigated we've only focused on British farms because we're a British charity. If you go to viva.org.uk, you can see some of the investigations we've done. We've investigated cannibalism. We've investigated obscene cruelty on farms, obscene conditions that they're kept in. We often hear that the UK has the best standards in the world, but that's certainly very subjective anyway. But even if we did, it's certainly a very low bar that we're holding. And it is also something that people say in other countries. When I was in New Zealand, that was a commonly held belief that New Zealand has the best standards in the world. France, often there's that view as well. It's not a case of saying, well, this country is worse than me, so what we do to animals in this country must be okay. I would more say it's a case of trying to be as compassionate as possible, rather than just trying to be a little bit more compassionate than our competitors. And the final question that I often get asked on the animal welfare side is, how do you know that animals feel pain like humans do? And pain is it's a very hard sort of thing to quantify. It's the reason why lobsters are still as standard boiled alive as a way of killing them, because a lot of people just don't see that sort of rather alien looking creature as being capable of feeling pain. I would certainly say, when we consider how evolution works, pain is a way of telling us to look after ourselves and to avoid injury, so that we're able to perform all of our functions as needed. As a child, if you accidentally or like try to touch flame, you'll be burned. It's a sort of message to your body: do not put your hand in fire. That is a really bad thing to do. And in the same way, other animals have evolved, just like us. If you see footage of animal cruelty, or you see footage of an animal having something inflicted on them, all of the ways that they react, they squeal, they scream, they try and get away, they might fight, they might flight, they're all just the same sort of things that we would have in humans. And babies cannot communicate yet. They don't have a language. They will grow up to be able to communicate with us, but it's very clear without that language that it's very clear whether a baby is feeling pain or not. In a similar way, it's very clear if a piglet is feeling pain or if a lamb is feeling pain. And with central nervous systems, it's just it may not be in exactly the same identical way as I feel pain, but at the same, pain is pain. Pain is something that we all want to avoid inflicting on ourselves, inflicting on other people. And it's just about expanding that compassion to farmed animals so that they don't have to suffer, they don't have to feel pain. And then moving on to the last section before we kick off with questions. I've seen lots of chat notifications coming up, so I'm looking forward to answering those questions in a few minutes. I'll just rattle through some of the most common environmental questions that I get asked as well. So often a lot of people will say that we need pasture lands. If you envisage the Lake District or the Mendips or the Cotswolds, lots of green fields stretching out for miles and miles. A lot of people say that we need pastures to store carbon and to store methane. I used to really like going for walks around with green pasture lands and so on. And then it hit me one day that a vegan diet uses far, far less land than an animal-based diet. I think an average vegan diet compared to an average meat-eating diet is about 8 times less land. We would be able to reforest so much more of this country if more people followed a more vegan diet. It doesn't have to be 100% of us following 100% vegan diet, but if more people cut down on animal products and replace them with plants, we would free up so much more land in this country, which we could actually use to rewild the country. A few years ago, a study came out saying that Britain is one of the most barren countries in the world. And when you actually look at pasture lands, all they're doing is providing one monocrop, grass, and one species, cows or sheep. Methane producing animals who have been shown time and time again to be extremely damaging for our climate. When we look at these pasture lands, what we could actually be looking at is forests, woodlands, some land being used to grow plants and crops and so on, but far more of it would be able to be used to actually have real biodiversity, real carbon store in woodlands and forests, which would also just be so much more beneficial to us as well as places where we can really sort of reconnect with nature far more than a green field with just a bit of grass on it. Certainly, I'm not anti-fields as a rule. It is nice to have some open spaces, but as a country, we'd be able to have so much more carbon store and methane store in land if we adopted a more vegan diet. Another question is that vegans buy lots of imported food, so surely that's worse than buying local. When we actually look at food, it's certainly, if it's a case of buying a British apple or a New Zealand apple, certainly a British apple in Britain seems to make a lot more sense. That's certainly the option that I would go for. But when we talk about animal agriculture, its impact is so huge in so many different ways, from the way how inefficiently it uses land, how inefficiently it uses water, how much methane the animals are producing. Food miles actually don't count for a great deal when we put that into perspective against animal-based foods. It's far more environmentally friendly to buy lentils grown in India than it is to buy steak in the UK, just because all of the methods of production that go into producing that steak, a lot of that steak will have been made from imported grains themselves. Lots of the UK's animal agriculture depends on imports from other countries around the world, from the Amazon, lots of palm kernels from Indonesia to feed the animals. So it's far more sort of nuanced than simply a British product is better than a vegan product. And at the same time, vegans can, you can eat extremely local, extremely close to home as a vegan throughout the year. I certainly do my utmost to try and buy as local, as British as I can as a vegan. But if it were a case of either a vegan with lots of imported options or a meat eater only from Britain, you're actually still doing a far positive impact by going for the vegan options. Sometimes a lot of people have recognized red meat has a lot of environmental problems and ask, why don't I just swap to chickens and fish? Surely my environmental impact would be really small if I did that. And certainly it's true, if you are only going to eat chickens, you're going to cut out all the red meat and you're only going to eat chickens and fish, your environmental footprint would decrease massively from a standard meat eating diet. It wouldn't decrease as much as a vegan diet. For example, chickens, with any animal, they consume food, they burn some of that food, and they store some of those calories, and they do that over and over again. There is no energy efficient way where 1,000 calories go into a chicken, you eat that chicken, and 1,000 of those calories go back to you. There will be lots of calories burnt in just their function, the way that they're using their bodies. Their hearts are pumping, even the last 20 odd minutes we've all been sitting down, not moving a great deal, but we've been burning calories. There is no way where you can have 100% efficiency in the calories that an animal consumes going into your body. In terms of fish, there's a huge, we're looking at a situation where there might be fishless parts of the oceans very, very soon. You've probably, many of you have probably heard that there's looking like more plastic than fish in the oceans by 2050. And a lot of that plastic comes from fishing. A huge amount of plastic that's left in the oceans is from ghost fishing nets. It's from trawlers will sweep along floors and break up coral reefs, which may have been there for thousands of years, and brilliant stores of carbon, just so that we can eat fish ourselves. Your impact will go down just on a chicken and fish diet, chicken, fish and plants diet. It certainly is not as much as it could be as a vegan diet. And of course, when people do swap from eating red meat to chickens, from the animal welfare side, they're eating far, far, far more animals and causing far, far more deaths, because it's a whole cow compared to a chicken. You'll be eating hundreds more lives by switching to fish and chickens. And there's just no need to be eating any lives at all on a vegan diet. I think
Will, sorry to jump in. We have got some really good questions here, and I'm just conscious of the time. But
yeah, I was just about to say I've
carry on, and
yeah,
do wrap up. But
yeah, I'd be really keen to move on to the floor now. Sorry, I got very into that. I hope that has been helpful, and yeah, I'd love to answer some of the questions now. Shall I just, Paul, do you want to pick out a few, or shall I just pick out some of them?
I've picked out a few which I could have thrown at you. Just to say, we've actually got our first overseas visitor during this week of events, Senai from Massachusetts. So I think you have a question about B12 supplements. We'll just unmute you. Can you do that for me, Paul?
Oh, yes. Hi, my name's Senai, and I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, over in the States. And one thing I know that a lot of people who go vegetarian and vegan do worry about is their B12 consumption. So I was just going to ask you, what are the better B12 supplement options, like maybe drops or pills or nutritional yeast, or any experience you've had with that I could recommend to my friends thinking of going vegan?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you. So over here in the UK, the one that I would definitely recommend is the Vegan Society multivitamin pill, which has its B12 is far 10,000% of what you need. There are some vitamins where it's actually dangerous to consume too much of what you need, but with B12, because it's soluble, it's not a risk. You can have too little, but you can't have too much. So that's a great one. The Vegan Society, you can get, I think, you get 150 or 300, or what am I? Yeah, I'm on 180 tablets, so for half the year. It's also got all the vitamin D that you need through winter as well, which is really handy. In terms of whether there's a difference between drops and tablets, as far as I'm aware, there's no difference, as long as it's from a reputable source, as long as it's, the Vegan Society approved, for example. It's really important to be getting that in. Nutritional yeast, for those of you who don't know, it sounds very strange, but it's a cheesy, sort of nutty thing that you can sprinkle on pasta. It works really nicely in pasta, for example. That has a huge amount of B12 as well, so that's a really great way of getting it in. And like I said earlier, for Marmite fans, Marmite is a really good way of getting it in as well. But in terms of whether it's a pill or a tablet or a drop or anything like that, as far as I'm aware, they're all the same, as long as you check them and they have more than 100% or more of the B12 daily need. And it's something to take regularly as well.
Now, well, Sylvia had an interesting question that's related to that, about having too much B12. Would you like to come in on that, Sylvia? Can you unmute her, Paul? I'm struggling here. Did you hear that, Sylvia?
Yeah, we got
Sorry,
Sylvia,
it was me that had muted myself.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, I think you're asking about having too much B12.
Yes, I I wasn't well at the time, so that might have been a cause of it, but I had to have a blood test, and the doctor was quite horrified at the levels of my B12 and told me to stop taking any vitamins that were 1000% of the RDA. So I just wondered what the view is from
Yeah,
vegans.
well, that's very interesting. So B12 is water soluble, meaning that it's as far in my experience and from the research I've done, it's one of those vitamins where if you are taking too much, the body will release it through going to the toilet, being water soluble. I haven't come across people like yourself who have had too much B12 before, so that's something that I'll definitely look into. Was it 1000% each day that you were taking?
Oh no, I've never ever taken vitamins every day. I always stagger them, But she looked at the ones that I was using and told me any that I had that had such a high percentage as in your case, that I think it's 1000, to just avoid it. So what I do now, rather than throw them away, is cut them in half.
Right. Yeah. Nice one.
Yeah, but I think we're coming.
Over, but it may
I think we're coming close to the end of the session. Paul, can we squeeze one more in, or?
Yes, no, probably right. a couple if we're quick.
I mean, a slightly different one for Minnie. You're asking about, if you can ask the question yourself, if we can unmute you. Yep, there we go.
I'm just curious because I've eaten meat most of my life, but last couple of years I've stopped eating meat or fish or anything. But I'm not vegan in that I still eat eggs. I will be at some point, but I don't do it from an animal rights point of view. I do it from a health point of view because it's a much, much healthier diet for me. So at what point can you call yourself vegan as opposed to plant-based?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think it can be quite a controversial one because some people.
About animals, I am bothered about them, and I've over the last couple of years, the more I've looked into it, and the more I've seen how animals are treated, the more I've become, oh, that's horrible. I can't do that anymore. But originally, it was just a case of I'm not feeling very healthy. This is a much healthier life. Because I don't tend to eat any processed food anymore either. So, but I kind of think I always started off in the kind of. It's more for my health, but then I became more interested in animal welfare as I went along. So I do care. It's just I'm more based on the health aspect. Yeah,
well, I mean, for me as well, for the first 2 or so years of my time as a vegan, I thought sort of there was a part of my mind where I was like, oh well, I guess it's better for the animals, but it was the health reasons that drew me in initially as well. For the first 2 or so years of my so far 9 years of being vegan. I guess at that point I probably would have thought of myself as plant-based because it wasn't vegan often has a connotation of, well, it's a tricky one. I think it's quite subjective myself. I think if you're following a largely vegan diet, then that's awesome. And I wouldn't feel like it needs to be sort of labeled either plant-based or vegan as such. I'd say it's more of a personal choice on what to go for.
I literally eat eggs still because I haven't quite got to that point of substitute. I'm just doing it one bit at a time so that I stick at it more than just change altogether. And it's been 2 years now, and I will eventually become completely plant-based. But it's eliminating one thing at a time until I'm completely
absolutely.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for all your contributions. I think it's now 7 o'clock, Paul.
Pretty much.
So
a couple of minutes perhaps, but
the fact we've overrun shows it was definitely very interesting, Will. Thank you very much.
I did mean to have more questions from the floor. I'm sorry if I got a bit carried away.
No, that's fine. All the participants stayed, which has to be a good sign, doesn't it? Now this is being recorded, and it will be on our website in the fullness of time. So yeah, thanks very much, Will, and
pleasure.
To everybody, please check out our website and think of taking part in other activities during the week. And I noticed, Minnie, you're interested in local activities. we'll advise you of what's going on in your area. Okay.
I've signed up to all the workshops this week. It's fine.
Great stuff.
I'll be with you all week.
Right, great stuff. Thank you very much to everybody, and yeah, good night.
Lovely. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Will. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks.